Erev Tov Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun, and you are watching Israeli News Live. We got an investigative report that we have been putting together for you here the last 2 days here, something I think that you'll find very enlightening. The title of it has Israel chosen their leader, and what is he hiding? So we have two questions here, and one, has Israel chosen their leader, and what is he hiding? Let's take a look at this very interesting and very provocative report we have this evening. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Sanhedrin that was formed in Israel not too long ago, and there was an article here on Breaking Israel News on September 10th, 2015, just before Pope Francis was about to do his trip to the United States, where he would basically project himself onto the world stage as a peacemaking leader, also a political leader as well, bringing about his document there to bring about global climate change. Another issue there. Anyway, in this article here, Sanhedrin passes judgment against Pope Francis Obama. Many peoples, this was something interesting, they quoted a scripture from Isaiah. Watch what the scripture says that they quote here. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Mount Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So basically, some of the Orthodox rabbis in Israel, as you see pictured here, got together, got themselves 71 rabbis for their Sanhedrin council, and put together their own Sanhedrin. And it has actually very much irritated some world leaders in light of their recent as far as last year, their recent indictment of President Barack Obama and, of course, Pope Francis. And some world bodies have kind of called out against this because it disturbed them that they consider them not a legal authority, but according to the rabbis here, they believe that their authority comes from God. But in light of the scripture they quoted, I think I have to challenge them whether or not their authenticity is really valid in God's sight. Let me share with you why. Let's look at a little bit more about the article first before we continue. 71 elders of Israel who identify themselves as the Sanhedrin gathered Wednesday on Mount Zion in a historic trial bringing to judgment Pope Francis and U.S. President Barack Obama. In absentia, the rabbis called the two leaders to trial for crimes leading to mortal endangerment of Israel and the Jewish people, of the Jewish nation. The central issue the Sanhedrin focused on during the trial was changing global tide against Israel and the Jews. The strongest charges were made against Pope Francis, who recently recognized the state of Palestine with an official treaty. According to the Sanhedrin, the Pope, who claims to accept the Bible that states clearly that the land of Israel was given to the Jews, has placed the world in grave danger. It was agreed beforehand that for the trial to be a true judgment, a council must be found who would represent the defendants in absentia with a strong belief in his case. Rabbi Yehoshua Hollander, who was until recently the foreign minister of the Sanhedrin, acted as counsel for the defense, brought forth compelling arguments that were difficult to refute. The first case, defense circumstance, justified the action of the Pope and Obama in light of their ameliorating circumstances. The second case, defense by deflection, attributed part of the guilt to others. The third defense, by lack of intent, claimed that there was no criminal intent behind the actions of the two leaders. Now this was let me just say this, friends, and I hate to say it this way, it's almost like a kangaroo court. And I don't say this in any disrespect to the rabbis that are trying to bring back a tradition that was set forth by Moses, which would be a commandment of the Lord. But let me tell you why it troubles me in this particular case here. The rabbi, it's actually Rabbi Yeshayahu. That's why I stumbled at the word. I didn't know, they actually put his name wrong in there. Rabbi Yeshayahu Hollander is the actual rabbi who was there to represent Pope Francis. Now, he is a Sanhedrin rabbi, but my concern, he's also a good friend of Pope Francis. So if the Sanhedrin is appointing a defense attorney for Pope Francis, if this were to be a real trial, and yet we have a year earlier, also in 2013, I believe they met as well, but on January 11, 2014, they were meeting. This article here in Diplomacy Post, Mr. Adnan Akhtar's book received by Pope Francis. The article stated here, Adnan Akhtar's book have been given to the Pope by a Jewish rabbi. Rabbi Yeshayahu Hollander, head of the Sanhedrin Court of B'nai Noah, met with the Pope on December the 11th, 2013. He presented the Pope with Adnan Akhtar's gifts during that audience. The gifts consisted of Rabbi Hollander's, I didn't put the gifts here, but it goes on to say, Rabbi Hollander presented these gifts to the Pope, saying, I present these gifts on behalf of Mr. Adnan Akhtar, an important Turkish Muslim philosopher and friend of mine. Now, this is why the whole idea of the Sanhedrin bringing the charge against Pope Francis and Barack Obama and then appointing a defense attorney for him, in this case here, Rabbi Yeshayahu Hollander, it's almost a joke. You know, because we see here, I mean, most of the time when you give gifts to the Pope is giving you gifts back, all right? So now they don't speak anything about the Pope returning a gift, and of course the rabbi is giving a gift on behalf of a Muslim cleric, and this is absurd to think then that you're going to get some kind of normal trial when you're dealing with people that are more like friends than anything else. He's not going to look at the evidence objectively. He's biased in his own opinion. Of course, he is a defense attorney, no less, so maybe that's why they chose him in the first place. The Pope needed a friend to defend him. Maybe this is the reason behind it. But anyway, the whole thing is just so suspicious. Here, the head of the Sanhedrin, and this is the biggest issue for me, the head of the Sanhedrin court, the Sanhedrin brings a charge against the Pope, and he's the head of the court, and they have to take him from being the head and put him as a defense because the court's bringing the charge against a man that he's a friend with. I mean, does it make any sense at all? All right, now, that's just something just to kind of show you the absurdity of the Sanhedrin in the first place. But it doesn't stop there. There is a huge challenge to the Sanhedrin. And this is obvious, and this is also, by the way, this shows clearly, this article here by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin clearly lets us know that they're not taking serious the Sanhedrin that's there in Israel right now. Although the rabbis came together, they brought their 71 men together, they are totally disannulling this body as being the Sanhedrin. Now, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, you need to understand, he is an Israeli rabbi, and he is the one of the 14 Israeli rabbis that signed the document with the Jewish Congress with the Pope of Rome for the Nostra Aetate, the 50-year reunion. They had been working with the Pope for the last 10 years, and he was one of the signatories on that document, establishing a new relationship, a covenant is what they called it, with the Catholic Church. All right, watch what he states. And he's talking about the Sanhedrin. Now, this was on his Parshat, it's a Jewish lesson he was teaching on from Leviticus 1, verses 1 through chapter 5, verse 26. This is what he says. If the Jewish state could be revived virtually from the ashes of destruction after 2,000 years, then why hasn't the Sanhedrin, the great Jewish court of the first and second commonwealths, been revived? Now this is 2016, March 13th, only a couple of weeks ago. So basically, this rabbi here, who is in cahoots with the Pope, totally disannuls the Sanhedrin that has been set up in Israel right now. So All right, now let's look at what else he says in the article. I'll just let the article speak for itself. On the surface, reviving the Sanhedrin seems impossible because its members must be recipients of the classic Jewish ordination that traces itself back to Moses himself, and even to the Almighty, as it were, who ordained Moses. Then Moses ordained Joshua, Joshua the elders, the prophets, the men of the great assembly. But this special ordination came to an end in the 3rd century of the Common Era, and since intrinsic to the idea of the Sanhedrin is a living tradition of ordination when ordination died out. So it would seem, did the Sanhedrin and the possibility of its revival. Now, he's claiming the Sanhedrin died out in the 3rd century. That's really kind of odd. Isn't it kind of odd that the Vatican just so happens to start up their legalized system right after the death of the Sanhedrin? Is there a coincidence in this, or is this something that's trying to be fabricated? Think about that. Because he claims it died out in the 3rd century. Well, right there in 325, the beginning of the 4th century, and of course even before then, they were already setting up the Catholic Church, universal church, a carry on from the disciples or the Jewish lineage. And maybe this is where they're going to trace back their lineage to Moses. Who knows? But a verse, watch what he says, in this week's portion creates alternative possibilities. In his commentary to the Mishnah, Maimonides writes, that's one of the Jewish sages, if all the Jewish sages and their disciples would agree on the choice of one person among those who dwell in Israel as their head, but this must be done in the land of Israel, he states, and that head establishes a house of learning, he would be considered as having received the original ordination and could then ordain anyone he desires. Maimonides adds the Sanhedrin would return to its original function, as it is written in Isaiah 1:26, I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy sages as in the beginning. Now, they're looking for one guy, and they're using this little thing from Maimonides, where he writes in the Mishnah that they can choose one guy. Of course, he's got to live in Israel. Did you guys forget that the papacy has got a little plans there, according to Daniel's prophecy, to build themselves a place there in Israel? They've got their own place there. In fact, that's the funny thing. The Pope can reside anywhere he wants to reside, because already by the old city there, they have a monstrosity of a Catholic church there that runs the affairs of everything in Israel, in fact. Now, this is what's interesting right here. Nostra Aetate at 50 is the article this picture came from, the Magna Carta of Interreligious Dialogue. These are some of the rabbis that were signing on with Pope Francis here, pictured here. Notice the rabbis have their arm around the Pope, but he don't have his arm too much around them, does he? But they are sure warming up to the Pope of Rome. Nonetheless there. Kind of reminds me of the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 verse 14, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the children of the violent among thy people. Remember, the angel is speaking to Daniel. His people are the Jewish people, right? So he says, also the children of the violent among thy people shall lift themselves up to establish the vision, but they shall stumble. As I said to you not long ago, I really believe this prophecy is being fulfilled in modern times, starting with Shimon Peres. Literally, when it speaks right here, Uvane Paritzi, that is the sons of the lawless. That's really what he's saying there. The sons of the lawless, Amcha, of your people. These here, what does it say? Inashu, or Inasu, excuse me, Inasu. What is this word here? They will marry. Lahamid Hazon, they will marry the vision. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? They're going to marry. The sons of the lawless are going to marry the vision. In other words, they're trying to bring the vision of Isaiah, the prophecy there where the law goes forth from Jerusalem. They're trying to marry it. How would Israel marry? If Israel's going to get married, who are they going to marry? We normally think of the marriage covenant, like in the believers of Yeshua. The marriage covenant is between the believer and Yeshua. That is the marriage covenant, right? Israel also is looking for the coming of Mashiach, a marriage covenant. Well, the question is, they're looking for one leader to head the Sanhedrin. Have they already chosen that leader? Right where the Sanhedrin did their court case against Pope Francis, by the way, he was found not guilty. He was crowned. Well, I shouldn't say he was crowned. He's wearing his crown right there on King David's tomb, where he was given an official seat in the upper room, given an official seat by the Israeli government in the upper room, given an official seat in Jerusalem. That makes him the king of Israel. So what all has this king of Israel done? What has he been doing to the Jewish people and the Jewish nation since its birth in 1948? Let's take a look. According to Simcha Yokobevitz, and forgive me, I'll just say Simcha. I do not have Jacob Ovisi. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I apologize. I did not take the time yet to go see how his name is pronounced. Anyway, a recent article in the Times of Israel, March 25th, 2016, a few days ago. Jesus discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This amazing scholar and researcher here really uncovered some very disturbing information. Not that this information discovering that Yeshua is actually written in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but what was going on that has kept that information suppressed. And of course, those that they're electing to be their head for Israel has a lot to do with the suppression of the information. Let's take a look at this article here. We're going to go through pretty much the entire article, so just bear with me. It is a fascinating discovery too, by the way. My investigation of the Dead Sea Scroll has just premiered on Curiosity Stream, launched by John Hendricks, founder of Discovery Channel. Curiosity Stream is the world's first streaming service devoted exclusively to documentaries. The Dead Sea Scrolls report is part of the initial reports dealing with biblical mysteries. I believe in the investigation, my investigation sheds a new light on the Dead Sea Scrolls, he says, which are arguably the most famous archaeological artifacts ever found. All right, now let's see what we got here. He goes on, from the moment of their discovery, some scholars suggested that at least some of the scrolls may be the work of early Christians. After all, certain teacher of righteousness is mentioned as a persecuted figure, and there is also a wicked priest and other characters that seem to mirror early Christianity. Most scholars, however, have dismissed any connection between the community that hid their scroll library since 2,000 years ago in the caves of Qumran and the earliest followers of Jesus. Now, I've made a discovery, he says, that may change all this. Put simply, I believe that one of the fragments, called by scholars by the very unappealing name of 4Q541, explicitly refers to Jesus. And he goes on to say, I was first drawn to this fragment by authoritative translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Florencio Garcia Martinez, in 1996. In fragment 24, column 2, the scroll refers to someone called the dove. The writer of the scroll asked the dove's followers not mourn for him, and further says, do not bring the nail near him. Given that Jesus is often identified with a dove, in regards, you can look at Matthew 3:16 and Luke 3:22. And the Gospels explicitly refer to the nails of the crucifixion in John 20:24, and also to the mourning of his followers after the crucifixion. It seems reasonable to me that 4Q541 may be referring to Jesus. So I looked up Martinez more completely, study edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which also supplies the Aramaic original to see what I could learn. And he says, I learned a lot. All right, now I actually took and went online and pulled the actual fragment that they're speaking about here and copied the page there, brought it for you so you could get a better look of what this fragment actually looks like. And it's always in the fragments there. It's very difficult to read because sometimes the words look like they're running together. They do have spaces, but and the quality as well. So anyway, continuing on, he said, I learned that Martinez, which is pictured here, must have been nervous about the original reference to the nail and changed his translation. In the new edition, Martinez translated the Aramaic tsatsa, i.e. the nail, as a nighthawk. More than this, in the same section, I discovered untranslated the word talia, cross or crucifixion. Now notice what he says in Aramaic, but notice what he says. The word is not even translated. One, he avoids translating the word nail as nail. He translates it nighthawk, that's tsatsa, which any Aramaic speaker today would tell you tsatsa is a nail. In fact, in the interview that he does here, the documentary, he's speaking to one of those gentlemen that actually speak Aramaic fluently and is a detailed document examiner there, and he says to him that if you were to ask my son today, go get me a tsatsa, he said he's going to bring you back a nail, is what he's going to bring you. Okay, anyway, let's continue on though. Martinez's version of the original, but it sure seemed coincidental that its possible reference to the crucifixion was the same fragment that I now believed was referring to Jesus. What was this all about, I asked myself. Why were the words being retranslated or not translated at all? Were scholars worried about finding Jesus in ancient texts other than the New Testament? Sure they are. They're always worried about that one. He goes on, I got access to the original fragment in the vaults of the Shrine of the Book, which is part of Israel's museum. With the naked eye, I could clearly see part of the taf in the Talia crucifixion. The word tzatzah was also very clear. I interviewed the Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, Dr. Alexei Yuditsky, and he told me that even though tzatzah in the Syriac Aramaic spoken in Israel at the time of Jesus meant nail, it did mean a bird of prey, like a nighthawk. Okay? In an obscure text of Persian and Aramaic, he also said the scholars prefer not to translate Talia crucifixion because the first letter of the word is not clear. When I pointed out, as he goes on to say, when I pointed out many of the words in the Dead Sea Scrolls are translated, even though they are missing a letter, he shrugged and said, depends on the word. So now I became really suspicious, he says. God bless him for being suspicious. Now comes the troubling part. At this point, my investigation took me to the translator of the official translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Professor, notice, Father Emil Puek from the École Biblique in Jerusalem, Catholic guy. By the way, the Catholic Church was over these documents from the very beginning and for many years. You want to know why? Because Israel in the War of Independence lost the battle to the modern-day Jordanians, and they annexed the West Bank and created the country of Jordan. And of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered during, right there at the beginning of 1946-47, before Israel became a nation. So therefore, they weren't going to allow any Jews to have anything to do with these scrolls. So they kept it between Muslim scholars and Catholic scholars. That way, they could weed out anything they didn't want you to know about. And I don't say that it's only the Catholic Church that is doing the hiding of this information. There's also theft involved, etc. But one theft in particular you're going to look at here in a moment may very well have went straight to the Vatican, and is probably the most incriminating evidence thus far. Continuing on here, we find out that Father Pugh is aware of the hesitation to translate the plain meaning of the words. I'm sorry, let me back up. He says, I brought up the issues concerning the words Talia and Tsatsa. Father Puick is aware of the hesitation to translate the plain meaning of the words as far as he is concerned. He is sticking to his authoritative first translation, which I now learned refers to both the nail and a crucifixion. From Puick's perspective, there is no need to translate Tsatsa by reference to Persian Aramaic, and there is no need to leave the word for crucifixion out of the translation. Well, he did something good, didn't he? There is enough left of the letter Tav to make the word Talia very clear. But here's where the problem comes in. But the Professor Puick surprised me. He said that dove was the natural translation of the Hebrew Aramaic word Yonah, which appears in the text, but he preferred to translate it as agitator. Has anybody ever noticed a dove being an agitator? No. Because after all, the dove in early Christianity refers to Jesus. In other words, by his own admission, Puech purposely fudged the translation so that the references to Jesus would be lost. Why did he do this? According to the Father Puech, by definition, the Dead Sea text can be referring to Jesus. But yet he intentionally, totally messes it up. Why? Gosh, friends. You guys ought to do some research on your own. You would be surprised. Some of the scholars that have worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls that have come out and told that the Catholic Church is hiding the truth of what's in these scrolls because it delegitimizes their authority. Okay? I'll just drop that bombshell right there for you. Anyway, Jesus discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, continue on in the article, he says, so what are we left with? So Ha states here, we are left with a text where some scholars are leaving out the crucifixion word altogether, while others are substituting nighthawk for nail. At least one scholar substituted agitator for dove, based on his preconceived idea about the context of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In other words, to make sure that it cannot even remotely apply to Jesus. My gosh, friends. He goes on, the final stop in my investigation was the offices of Dr. Robert Deutsch, probably the only honest-to-goodness scholar in the group here. He is considered by many the #1 Aramaic and Hebrew epigrapher in the world. What does this text say? I asked without hesitating. Dr. Deutsch answered, it seems, because he's handing him showing him the fragment or copy of the fragment. He says, without hesitating, Dr. Deutsch answered, it seems that this is a text written by the followers of Jesus after the crucifixion. They are telling each other not to focus on the nail and the crucifixion as their enemy does, and not to overly mourn their loss, but rather to focus on the eternal light mentioned at the end of the fragment. That's a shocker, isn't it? He goes on in concluding here, it's too early to tell who the enemy referred to in the text is or what the message of the text is. What is certain, however, is that if fragment 4Q 541 is referring to Jesus, then maybe some of the other fragments are also referring to him. Based on this investigation, perhaps it's time to re-examine the Dead Sea Scrolls and their translation. Well, I would go a step further. I think it's time for the Catholic Church to tell you what they hid from your eyes as well. Not just the Catholic Church, though, but even some of the Muslims that have sold fragments and complete copies to other individuals. Watch what we find out here. Father Roland Gouraud-Devaux, born December 17, 1903 and died in 71, September the 10th, was a French Dominican priest who led the Catholic team that initially worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was the director École Biblique, a French Catholic theological school in East Jerusalem, and he was charged with overseeing researching on the scrolls. His team excavated the ancient site of Ofkerbet Qumran in 1951 and 1956, as well as several caves near Qumran northwest of the Dead Sea. The excavations were led by Ibrahim el-Asuli. As I said, the Muslim community and the Catholic Church all ran everything. Caretaker of the Palestine Archaeological Museum, or what came to be known as the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem. Such a nice name, isn't it? Take away the idea of the Palestinians so it doesn't look like that the world has betrayed the Jewish nation by doing all the archaeological research without their involvement. Of course, they got the rabbis involved in it a little bit later down the road once they had a chance to destroy evidence, get rid of evidence, or flat out lie about the translation. Another very interesting article here is found on BibleTemple.net. By the way, if you look this up, be sure to add a T to the end of temple, then .net. That's where it's at there, but Bible Temple is the name of the institute there. The Hidden Aramaic Enoch Scroll. It says, in this from an interview in 1994 in Biblical Archaeological Review with John Strugnell, one of the Dead Sea Scroll scholars, the interview is about events that happened in 1990. Okay, so things continue going on for many, many years afterwards. Now, Herschel Shanks, by the way, is the one who is interviewing John here. And we'll just stick with John for his name for Strugnell, and we'll talk about Herschel just using his first name as well. Anyway, Herschel asks the question, there is this strange story that has been in the papers that at one point, two prostitutes, one Jewish and one Arab, came to you at the École Biblique, the French school in Jerusalem. So see, he works for the Vatican school as well. And I believe took you to a field outside of Bethlehem where they removed from their private parts microfilms of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of them being the complete book of Enoch. Is that true? Now, I want you to notice what he says. One of them being a complete book of Enoch. Because later in another article I was able to trace down, he sees another book as well that resembles very much like the book of Enoch. That book ended up disappearing to Europe. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. So anyway, John answers. He laughs a little bit. Well, there are a lot of mixed elements, but bits which are true, bits which are false. Herschel asks, could you tell us the story? John says, there was a whore, removing colorful creations. There were women messengers of uncertain profession who showed me a microfilm, not of the École Biblique, nor even in Jerusalem. Now, the incident in the field outside Bethlehem belongs to a completely different story, he says. John goes on, and then I myself saw one, the Enoch microfilm, but I must save that story for my memoirs. So he won't even tell you what that story is. Herschel goes on, this is the story about the prostitute. Now here's in yellow. I put it in yellow because I want to make sure you see this. He says, yes. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were 5 other manuscripts from Cave 11 sometime to be found in the near future. I wouldn't be overwhelmed if there were 7 or 8. If none ever came to light, I would wonder on earth who had been having these hallucinations or why they are being held back. So we're looking upwards to 8 books that were removed from Cave 11 at Qumran and have just disappeared. 8. Easily 4 or 5, pretty much without any hesitation. But upwards to 8 books from Cave 11. Now this is just Cave 11 only that have disappeared. Watch what Herschel asks. Are you currently working on trying to purchase or acquire these scrolls? Yes. We got a couple of people interested. But after the big upheaval in Kuwait, things settled down, and the urgency of trying to get rid of this material evaporated. Now, what he means by the urgency, when Kuwait was attacked by Saddam Hussein, some of the owners of those documents were willing to cut their price in order to get them sold. But after the war ended there, they didn't care about selling them so quick after all. And supposedly it's a lot of rich bankers that own these. Herschel goes on, are you still working on it? He says, oh yes, there are 2 or 3 serious projected buyers, but as I said, to me, the most important thing is not just that there are projected buyers of that one manuscript, but the fact that it is highly likely that there should be 3 or 4 others. Okay? Now, like I said, you don't see it here, but you're fixing to see right now a little bit more evidence about what he's talking about. This is called, the title is The Angel Scroll or the Book of Visions of Yeshua ben Pedaiah. The statement here is by Stephen J. Paffan of the University of the Holy Land. Watch what he states here. 4 months ago, I was approached by a senior writer from the Jerusalem Report, Nettie Gross, and was asked if I would help verify the existence of a Dead Sea Scroll manuscript which had not been published previously. I was aware of a story known by other scholars that was at least one rather well-preserved scroll which had made its way to Europe. The scroll made its way to Europe, huh? And which was similar to the Book of Enoch or Jubilees. This may be identified as the source of a scroll fragment examined by Professor John Strugnell, sometimes in 1967-1968, which he described elsewhere as something resembling the Book of Enoch. Can you imagine that? Now, friends, you have to understand, the Catholic Church was over these sites, supposedly guarding them. I'm sure bandits can steal and get away with a lot of things, but this one ends up in Europe. Where? And how much of the fragments has the Vatican hidden? I want to share something else. In light of this information here, I wanted to share with you just a couple of quotations I found on one of the many websites that I've seen out there And this was just some factual statements that was being stated about how the scrolls were being handled. And by the way, if you look up online, Dead Sea Scrolls Deception, there's been a tremendous amount of books written. Even some of the scholars that have worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls that actually saw fragments that you will never get to see again, because they claim that the church themselves actually hid it. Ackerman, I believe, is one of those scholars. I forget exactly if that's the right pronunciation of his name, but anyway, they bring out some very things that are very alarming in this, but clearly say that the scrolls did include teachings of Yeshua himself, or by his apostles, etc. Let me read to you this right here. The Roman Catholic Church controls over the Dead Sea Scroll research must inevitably foster a grave element of suspicion. One must ask, as many informed outsiders have, what is the reason for the reluctancy of the international team of researchers, whom all but one were Catholic, he was agnostic, to print their findings? And by the way, the Catholic Church held these documents for 50 years, friends. 50 years before finally in 1991, the pressure on the Catholic Church to release them finally gave way. But still, the issue is why wasn't something done sooner? And of course, in 50 years, the Vatican could hide a lot of documents. You can believe that. Anyway, the Catholic Scroll Research Team, another thing this person here made a comment about. Research team made no real pretense to dispassionate scholarship. In fact, they regarded it as positively dangerous. They decided that ultimately the biblical scholars' work was to be guided and determined by church doctrine and be subject always to the sovereign right of Holy Mother Church and witness definitively what is in fact concordant with the teachings she has received from Christ. In other words, it does not agree with Catholic Church teaching. It is not to be shared with the world. All right? The implications of all this are staggering. All inquiry and investigation, regardless of what it might turn up or reveal, must be subordinated and accommodated to the existing corpus of official Catholic teaching. In other words, it must be edited or adjusted or distorted until it conforms to the established Catholic doctrine of today. So you can see why there has been a lot of allegations, and I do want to make that clear, allegations against the Catholic Church that their scholars indeed hid and intentionally those fragments that are available that clearly do identify Yeshua, as Simcha has pointed out in his own recent investigation of only one fragment piece, that identify Yeshua have been intentionally by those Catholic scholars to be covered up. What else have they been covering up? What else have they been hiding? And yet this is the very man, the Pope of Rome. Of course, there's been many popes over this issue, but this is the guy that it seems that they are working to put the head of Israel. I got a very startling letter not too long ago that claims, and I could not validate this letter to save my life anywhere. I could not find any news to support it, but it's supposed to be a secret mass that is going to be held between leading rabbis of Israel, the priestly group of as well, meeting with the Pope of Rome in a secret mass is supposed to be done in Israel, where they would basically put him as the high priest. Now, I can't say that's really true or not. I don't know if it's just a fabrication or whatever, but when I read the document, it's very detailed, very interesting to read. And of course, at the same time, then right after I get this document, I actually see that the Temple Institute is now stating that they are now appointing the Kohanim. And the Pharisees of today, friends, are not the true Levitical bloodline. It is the Qumran community. This is the true Zadok. These are the true Zadok priesthood. They are the true descendants that Moses appointed to be the priest, not the Pharisees. And many scholars say that this was an Essene community. You find it on the History Channel. It was an Essene community. You find it even in Simcha. He talks about them being Essenes. Josephus said it was an Essene community. Pliny said the Essenes, or the Ebionites, they were called the Ebionites, and don't let Essene be a bad word to you. It's just the title that they had given it through different historians from back in that era. But Pliny noted that the Ebionites, or the Eboni, were located on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea between Jericho and En-Gedi. Qumran's the only place that's in between there. Doesn't leave a whole lot more communities, does it? But of course, the Catholic Church has one of their own bishops. I believe it was from the 5th century, and I've been trying to find that document. I ran across it the other day. I should have saved it. I didn't. But he claims that that community there stated it had writings of Moses that they weren't using in the Torah at that time. Well, that's kind of interesting, especially in light of John and his, let's go back just real quick, look at him here. When John himself, right here, this is John Strugnell, who says that there was another scroll very similar to the Jubilees and as well as the Book of Enoch. Could this have been a book authored by Moses? It's hard to say. Anyway, I'm Stephen Benoon with your investigative report on who is heading Israel. Very interesting. And what is he hiding? Shalom. God bless you.